Hello everyone, Stjepan here. In today's video I'm going to cover an extremely useful but very underrated variation of the Ruy Lopez, the exchange variation. And if you need any more general information about the opening, you can watch the video in which I cover all the basics and the main variations, and I'll put the link in the description below. And in this video I'm going to go into much more detail on the exchange variation. The Ruy Lopez starts after white plays pawn to e4, pawn to e5 by black, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. And this is now the Ruy Lopez. And each move so far was designed to increase control over key central squares. And white is trying to push through with d4 and attack the e5 pawn, the e5 square, and black is fighting to stop that, simply. Black's main response to the Ruy Lopez is pawn to a6. And that's a move which is indirectly defending the e5 pawn and preventing the d4 break. It's disrupting the bishop that's attacking the knight that's defending the e5 pawn and stopping d4, which might sound complicated, but it's actually really simple. And the opening moves of the Ruy Lopez make perfect sense when it comes to central control and central pawn breaks. So each side is trying to get as much as possible from the central position out of the opening. And the exchange variation is the simplest approach white can take in resolving the issue which occurred. Black is attacking his bishop, which was developed to b5 to disrupt the defense of e5 and d4. So the simplest solution is just to take the knight and weaken black's defenses. And the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez starts with bishop taking the knight on c6. Bishop takes the knight is removing the defender and strengthening the central key squares in the position. And that's the theoretical idea behind the opening. Now after bishop takes, black has to take with the d-pawn, he has to recapture with the d-pawn, and with this move we enter the main line of the exchange Ruy Lopez. This position is both simple and complicated to play at the same time. And black, it offers white a great positional advantage if utilized properly. What you can immediately see is that black's pawn structure is compromised after d takes c6, and he has doubled c-pawns, which means that any piece exchanges will favor white, because in an endgame, white will be able to create a passed pawn much easier, or he will have a theoretical advantage in pawn structure. And what black got in compensation for the ruined pawns and the doubled c-pawns is the bishop pair. Black got rid of white's most dangerous piece in the symmetrical king-pawn openings, the light-squared bishop, and that's key in this position particularly because the light-squared bishop is often the piece around which the position is based, especially in the Ruy Lopez. And in many closed lines, white will spend several moves to make sure the bishop is safe and remaneuver it to a4, to c2, etc., etc. And the main purpose of the bishop is to attack black's main weakness, the f7 square, which in this position is going to be much easier to defend, and black will generally have an easier time defending. So after d takes c6, in this position, first of all, I'm going to show you one of the most common opening traps in the exchange Ruy Lopez. You might think that white is able to capture the e5 pawn now, since the knight is no longer defending it, but that's actually a mistake. If white captures on e5, then black is able to simply play queen d4, double attacking the knight and the e-pawn, and after knight to f3, knight retreating, queen takes e4, queen to e2, of course, blocking the check, queen takes, king takes e2. Of course, in this position, black can't take the c2 pawn because the queen is pinned to the king, so he has to take. And now black stands better. The material is equal, but white gave away castling rights. So, of course, after d takes c6, white can't take the pawn. The most common continuation for white, and what's played in perhaps more than 90% of games, if not more, is castling by white. And this is the main position. Now this is the main line. Let me just cover quickly. After bishop takes c6, of course, black should be taking with the d-pawn. If he takes with the b-pawn, then once again, you might think that white can capture the e5 pawn now, but once again, black will have a slight advantage, because if knight takes e5 in this position, then black can play queen to g5, and after knight to f3 defending, queen takes g2, rook to g1, queen h3. It's a bit better for white than the previous continuation, but generally, black stands okay. And after b takes c6, even if white castles, which is the best move and the main move, you can see the advantage of black capturing with the d-pawn instead of with the b-pawn, because now his pawn structure is he did take towards the center. He will have more central pawns, but the position after d takes is much simpler to play, and it's easier to defend for black. And you also get to develop your bishop quickly and open it up on the diagonal. Once you take with the d-pawn, the bishop is automatically developed. So d takes c6 is the main move. And now, after castles by white, which is the main move, if black forgets to defend his e5 pawn now, the queen maneuver no longer works. So if black plays a simple developing move, such as knight to f6 in this position, then white would be able, of course, just to take the e5 pawn, and there is nothing black could do about it. So after castles, the main move for black is f6. And that's the main line. That's by far the most commonly played move in this position. Before going further with the main line, I'm going to show you some alternatives to castling that white can play. After d takes c6, white doesn't have to castle, it's just the best move. Another move white could try is knight takes c3, is knight to c3, immediately developing a piece, not castling. And this is basically reversing the move order, and black still responds with f6, defending the e5 pawn, and this is one of the main lines, and almost all the games go like this. White would now strike in the center with d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4, c5, knight d2, e2, queen takes d1, knight takes d1, and you can see in this position that white still kept his king in the center, so it's a bit less safe for the white king, but since there are no queens on the board, he has an okay position. It's just a different approach to the position. And after bishop to e6, bishop f4, black would generally castle queenside, knight to e3. This position is a bit double-edged when compared to the main line, with castling with move 5, but white is still slightly better, and black's pawn structure is still his biggest deficit. So let's say knight to e7, developing, rook to d1, rook takes, king takes, g5, bishop to g3, f5, which, okay, black has compensation, black has a bit more aggressive position, but that's because white didn't castle. So, after d takes c6, either castles or knight to c3. Another alternative white could play after d takes c6 is immediately striking in the center with d4. Not waiting to castle, but striking right away. And of course, black would have to react with e takes d4. White would play queen takes d4, exchanging the queens is favorable in this position because any trades get him closer to the endgame, in which his pawn structure would be much more significant. So queen takes, knight takes, bishop to d7 is the main move. Black is preparing to castle queenside, bishop to e3, castles queenside, knight to c3, and f6 in this position, or bishop to b4 can be played as well. And white has a slight edge in this position, but let's return to the main line with white playing castling, because after d takes c6, castles is played in more than 90% of games. So after castles and black playing f6, which is by far the most common move, this is now the starting position of the exchange variation. White's most common move in this position by far is d4, which is aimed to strike at black's center immediately. And if you notice, well, white now has only one move actually. There is basically no alternative to d4, and in Livebook there is more than 2000 games with d4 and around 30 games only with the second most often played move, which is d3. So this is a must play. You are striking in the center immediately and immediately exploiting the weak position of the black king that's still stuck on e1. So the position could become extremely dangerous for black if he isn't careful. E takes d4 is the only reply, and now knight takes d4. Of course, you can take with the queen as well. Queen takes d4 is also a good move, and in both variations white has an edge, but keeping the queens on is a smart idea for white because black's king is on e8, vulnerable to attack, and it's much easier to create chances with the queens on the board. And the game could continue bishop to d6, bishop to e3, etc, etc. And okay, white is still better, but black could have exchanged queens as well, which would relieve the pressure on the position. After knight takes d4, the main continuation in this position is c5. This is the main move, immediately chasing the knight away, knight to b3, and now black commonly exchanges the queens anyway. So queen takes d1, rook takes d1, bishop to g4, attacking the rook, and f3. And this position is, this is what you commonly get out of the exchange variation. And if you look at the position, if you count the strengths and the weaknesses, you can notice first of all that white's queen side is undeveloped. So he has 4 undeveloped pieces. Okay, the rook on d1 is developed, but it's not doing that much. And black has a ruined pawn structure in this position, and the c pawns will give a big advantage to white as the pieces get exchanged. The point of the f3 move was to disrupt the bishop and take away squares from the light squared bishop. And same as in many paired positions and positions in which the queens get exchanged, such as the Berlin defense, you are aiming to disrupt your opponent's pieces from moving freely. And the side that can control more squares in the center will generally be better here. King safety isn't such an issue in this position because both kings are pretty safe. And the only thing you have to worry about is piece activity and pawn structure. And the main continuation after this is bishop to e6, of course, bishop is retreating, bishop to e3 developing, now attacking the c pawn twice. Black would have to defend with b6, and now knight to c3. And this is actually this is still mainline theory, and there is still maybe 100 games played from this position. And this is the position which you have to remember. Let me just return to some alternatives for black after castles. So I said f6 is by far the main move, and you will see f6 in most of your games. But after castles, black could also go for queen to d6, which is one alternative to f6. It does defend e5, but is blocking the f8 bishop. And another move black could try instead of f6 and queen to d6 is bishop to g4. This defends the e5 pawn indirectly, pinning the f3 knight to the queen. And knight to f6 as well, which isn't that good. White could try knight takes e5 in this position, queen to d4, knight to f3, and black, of course, in this position can't take the e4 pawn, of course, because white would simply play rook to e1. And this is the starting position. If you remember, white was able to take the e5 pawn. White wasn't able to take the e5 pawn before black played knight to f6, but in this position now, after white castles on move 5, black actually has to worry about that and has to defend. So this is what would have happened if black doesn't defend e5. So knight to f6 would be a mistake, and white would be able to take the pawn, and queen to d4 doesn't work because knight to f3, and if you take the e4 pawn, then rook to e1 wins immediately. So f6 after castles for white, f6. And if you follow the main line, this is d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4, and this is the position you have to remember. Now from this position on, of course, you don't have to follow the main lines with c5 for black, etc., etc. But what you have to remember is that if you are black, you need to gain the initiative as soon as possible. And perhaps you shouldn't even have to worry about the positioning of your king, because even though your king is unsafe, you should be the one attacking, because long term you will suffer if the pieces get exchanged. So try to attack as soon as possible. And if you are white, first of all, try to exploit the fact that black's king is on e8. Try to create as much pressure as possible. Don't attempt to exchange queens. Don't allow black to exchange queens if possible, if it's possible. And try to attack black as soon as possible. And even if you don't manage, any exchanges will favor you. So if you exchange pieces, your pawn structure is much superior to black's pawn structure. If you notice these pawns, black isn't able to create a passed pawn here in this position, and white is very much able to utilize his 4-3 pawn majority on the king side. And if you imagine all the pawns just moving forward, white would be able to create a passed pawn much easier than black, because black's c pawns are doubled and pretty useless in this position. And this is the same as in the Berlin defense. And this is actually a pawn structure which you have to study if you want to play the exchange Ruy Lopez. This is the main asset white has in this position. And if white can compensate enough with the pawns for being deprived of his bishop pair and relieving the pressure from black's f7 square, then white will be much better in any endgame. Okay, everyone. Thanks for watching. I hope you got something from this video and that you learned something about the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. And stay tuned for more videos on chess theory. Thanks very much. See you soon. Bye.